Hi, in this video I'll be demonstrating how to change the front wheel bearings on this BMW e65 750. Right, on the e65 BMW, the bearing is a bearing and almost like a hub. There you can see it's a whole unit. So it's not just the bearing, you've got to get this whole unit out. When you are doing this repair, make sure your new bearing comes with 4 replacement screws. If you're not sure if your bearing is faulty, all you need to do is jack up your car and spin the wheel. If you hear a whirring sound, it's almost like taking a cardboard and letting it scrape on the ground and letting it run like that. It's like a constant grind. It's like, ah. So if I spin this and you hear a, doesn't matter at which speed, you hear it all the time. If you want to test it while you're driving, put the car in neutral and roll down a hill, open the windows, and then you hear this grinding. Right, so the first step is to get the wheel off. So you will need trestles. Now before you do any repairs, just remember to chock the back of your wheels so that the car cannot move, and the handbrake is on and it's in park. Please note the use of a trestle, and there's another backup trestle just in case. Right, I just blow it out with the blower. I don't want any of that brake dust in my lungs. Right, so I need to get the caliper off. The first thing I need to do is open the brake pads, so I need to separate them. Now, depending on which side you're at, the brake wear sensor would be here. Just be very careful not to damage that. Right, so all I do is I take my screwdriver and I put it in a cloth, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the disc. As you can see, I'm going to separate the pad from the disc by wedging it and opening the caliper. Right, you might even notice here how it is opening. It's already opened enough. Now, my pads are still quite new, so I just need to create a little bit of space there so that when I take off the caliper, I won't have a problem. Also, sometimes the brake disc is a bit worn and there's a bit of a lip here, so it's hard to slide on and off. So I've just separated the brake pads, and now what I need to do is loosen these 2 screws there and there. Those are the 2 screws that actually hold the caliper on. Now before I do that, just make sure you've got something to rest the caliper on after you've removed it, because once you remove it, it's heavy and it will just be hanging by this pipe here, the oil pipe, which we don't want to happen. So I've got just a bucket and I'm putting it there. When I've loosened these, I can now just rest the caliper onto the bucket. Now the screws at the back here are very tight. Now the 2 screws are a size 18. Right, I'm just using a breaker bar just to help me here, just to do the initial loosen. Right, so I remove these 2 screws, and here it slides out. Just be ready to rest it on something. Right, so it was there, and there's one over here. These are the 2 screws, and there's the brake caliper. Notice it's that screw and that screw. Well, that's the only screws that are available there. Right, now I need to get the disc off. There's a number 6 Allen key little screw there, so I'm just going to loosen this. A little tip here, make sure you use the right size, because this little screw here gets easily damaged. Now notice the disc wants to come off quite easily, so I'm just supporting it here with my hand so that it doesn't fall on the ground and get damaged. Right, the next step is to remove this heat shield. This is a size 10 screw. Alright, here's the bearing. Now the BMW TIS manual says that you must take this whole thing off. Take this whole thing off and then remove the bearing, reinstall the bearing, and then put this all back, which means that you need to remove the control arms, the tie rod, or these little things here, the little sensor at the back to see if the wheels stop. So that is the TIS manual method, and that's the method I'm going to follow. I am aware that some people have found a way of changing the bearing by just dropping this a little bit and changing it while it's on the strut. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take this off. These screws here are very tight, and actually I'm changing the shock at the same time. Now this is a size 22, but unfortunately when you turn it, often the whole ball joint turns. That is why there's a space inside here for a size 6mm Allen key to hold the shaft in place. But the very first turn should be fine, and I'm just going to loosen it with a breaker bar so far. Right, I am just making sure that this is not turning inside there because I don't want to damage this boot. Right, so I remove the tie rod end. Right at the bottom is the control arm nut, and this is a size 21. I put the tie rod back in just so that I could loosen this so this doesn't wobble too much. Right, so I've just put a number 7 Allen key here just to hold it in place while I loosen the nut. Right, now we just have the lower control arm nut over here. There's a ball joint, so we need to release this. I'm going to tell you ahead of time that it's good practice to loosen the control arm bolt here at the back so that this can move, and you'll see why in a second. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually just loosen this. I'm not going to take it off completely, I'm just going to loosen it, but keeping in mind that when you re-tighten it, you have to tighten it when this is under pressure, meaning that the tire is on and the car is no longer jacked, so the tire presses up, so that this lower control arm can be tightened when it's almost horizontal. So I'm just going to open this. This is a size 18. I'm just using my foot in the spanner. Right, now all I need to do is loosen this. Right, this is a size 22. Right, so I can release this, and it's very easy to release because I loosened that. So there you can see how easy that is. Right, we can see that I can remove this. See, there is that upper control arm, and I just put this at a funny angle, and there is the upper control arm. I'm not going to loosen the control arms bolts there. It's fine, I can actually work with it even in the way here. Right, now I've got the stabilizer link here, linking the sway bar to the shock. So it's got oil on it, but that oil is actually oil from the shock that's leaked out onto that nut. There's nothing wrong with the stabilizer link, this is just oil from the shock. Right, so all I'm going to do is remove that. Right, I've just put a number 5 Allen key in there while I rotate this so that the shaft doesn't turn at the same time. As stated, you do not need to remove the stabilizer links. I'm removing the link so that I can show you better angles on the video. Now the next step is to remove this little sensor cable. This is a size 5 Allen key. Now for your reference, here are the 4 screws to loosen the bearing, but the problem is that one. There's a 4th one behind the strut, and that's what makes this difficult. So that is why I'm going to remove this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open this. Now you can see this cable here is a bit taut, so I'm just going to slide it off here, and I'm going to remove it from here. There's a little clip at the back. I've opened it, and now I can release that cable out of the way. So now what I'm going to do is open this over here. Now this is a 16 and that's an 18. Now just note the orientation of this bracket. Now to get this off, I have to separate that. So what I do is I just spray some oil here just to help it. And then I just take my pry bar like that. Notice that the pry bar has an increase in thickness as it goes along. So if I just put my pry bar in there and then I tap it with a hammer, then this part over here will come down. Now be very careful, we don't want to drop this on the floor. Right, so over here I have my bucket, so this is going to fall onto the bucket, and over here I just tap on my pry bar just to expand this mouth a little bit, and it's not actually that tight. And you can see it moves really easily. I don't even think I needed the oil. Notice I don't hammer on this, I'm hammering on my pry bar. Alright, so here is the swivel bearing. I need to remove these 4 screws. They are going to be tight because there is thread locker on them. Now you can put this in a vise. If you do put it in a vise, grip on the bearing. Don't grip on this. If you are going to vise it, your vise will be over here, not on here. Right, so I'm not going to vise it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a pipe, which in this case it's actually a shock absorber, just so that it can't move, and I'm just going to get someone to stand on the other end there so that it can't move while I loosen these 4 screws, which are very tight. Now in my case, this is actually the old shock from the same car, so I'm changing my shocks at the same time. So you'll see that when I put this back on, you'll see a different shock. It'll actually be a black color shock. So I'm now going to remove these screws using a size 18. Right, you might want to use a breaker bar. Now these are tight all the way because they've put the thread locker on it to make sure it doesn't come off. Right, so there's the old bearing, and now I'm going to replace it with a new one. Now I'm just cleaning this. Right, there's just a bit of grit. Right, there's just a bit of dirt here. I'm just removing it with the scraper. Right, I'm just giving it a clean with thinners. Right, here is the replacement part. Make sure your replacement part comes with brand new screws. Notice the red thread locker on it. This is the replacement part I've used. That is 713-667770. Right, now I've made sure it's clean. Now I can seat this. Now it seats in only one way. Right, now the bearing can only go in one way. So make sure you've got your screws in. Just tighten it. Right, we tighten it to 110 Newton meters. And I'm going to put this on. Right, so in my case I did change the strut here. That is why it is black now. Now I just need to get the swivel bearing back up. So I'm going to flip this the other way around like that so that you can get a good view. Now, right, so I've got this tool here. I'm going to lift this up to get this higher up on the strut. Please note that I use the tool just to open the mouth. It doesn't need a lot of force. You can even just wedge a screwdriver between those two sides. I then push up. It's good if you've got two people, one to hold it open, one to push the swivel bearing up. Now there is a maximum that this can go to. If you look inside here, you can see that there's a ridge. So if you keep on hammering, you're going to hit that ridge and then this is going to get damaged. Right, so I'm installing this bolt. Note the bracket. I am going to put some thread locker on the threads here. Right, I torque this to 80 Newton meters. Right, so the next step is to attach the stabilizer link. So I'm going to have to rotate the strut. Right, you're supposed to use a new nut. I'm going to reuse this nut, but I am going to put some blue thread locker on it. Right, I do this to 45 Newton meters. Right, so I'm now threading this wire back here, and if yours had the brake sensor, you would also be threading the brake sensor. Right, I'm just wiping this sensor here, and now I'm going to install this in the swivel bearing. The screw for this, I just tighten to about 8 Newton meters, and then just make sure you put the thread lock on it. Right, now it's time to reseat the lower control arm, the upper control arm, and then the tie rod end. Right, I'm just cleaning these. Don't want any dirt there, and then also on the other mating surface. Now you should renew all these nuts, but I'm going to reuse them and then just use thread locker. Now just a note, just with a bit of swiveling you can get the control arms into the swivel bearing. You don't have to loosen anything, it does go straight in. So I'm just showing you the pictures of how I got it in. Now it's time to tighten the 3 ball joints. Each one of these is 165 Newton meters. Because I'm reusing the nuts, I'm using the thread locker, but as recommended, get new nuts if you are putting this back on. Right, I just want to show you the orientation of the wire here. It's there, it goes round, it then comes around the back, there's a clip there, then it's held on by that bracket at the back. Right, now it's time to put the heat shield back on. Right, here are the screws. I'm just going to put some thread locker on them. Right, so it is 4 screws. These are torqued to 12 Newton meters. Right, tighten this to 16 Newton meters. Right, now I'm going to return the brake caliper. Here are the screws. Remember to put Loctite on them. The torque is 110 Newton meters. Now as I grab the brake caliper, it's very important to keep the orientation of this pipe correct. For example, I mustn't twist this. If I twist it, then this pipe is going to be under unnecessary tension. I grab the brake caliper. Right, notice the brake pipe is in the same way it was before, and now I can just seat this in there where there's the space on that bracket. So the brake cable is not taut. Right, now I can insert the second screw and then tighten these. Right, so I torque the brake caliper to 110 Newton meters. Right, now I can return the wheel, but don't forget the upper control arm I loosened when I removed the swivel bearing. So once the wheel's back on, I'll put the car on the ramp and I'll have to tighten this bolt over here. Right, I'm on the left hand side of the car, and just a tip, notice this little clip here. The brake wear sensor is on this side and the mouth of the clip is on this side, otherwise it won't fasten. So here is the ABS sensor, so it's going there on the inside, and the wear sensors on the outside, and then you close the clip over there. Then don't forget to thread your wear sensor over here. Now another tip is this is the brake line, and when you take off the caliper it tends to go like that. So why that's a problem is as follows. Right, I've swiveled the swivel hub. And notice there's the brake line. Now, I don't know if you can see, it's doing quite a harsh turn. See there, it's doing quite a harsh turn, and look, this vehicle is old. You can see some of the deterioration of the pipe here. Now, partly because the last person who worked on this didn't actually have this out enough, so it was doing too harsh a turn, and that's why it was starting to wear unnecessarily quick over there. So now it can turn with a greater distance, giving a more gradual curvature when the wheel turns. Right, so that's what it looks like from that side, and that's what it looks like from that side. I mean, you could even push this in a little bit more, but don't do too much, otherwise it will wear here. Right, when tightening the control arm bolt, you can even ask someone to sit in the driver's seat. That's the best practice, but it's not very necessary, especially if your lower control arms have a little bit of wear on them. Right, the tightening torque is 100 Newton meters, but then put it in the 90 degree or vertical position and then go 15 degrees. So once it's vertical, you just push the wrench 15 degrees more. Right, so I had it at 100 Newton meters and then I just pushed the wrench 15 degrees, and that's how tight you make it. Right, the bearing has been installed, and I'm going to spin the wheel so you can hear how there is no bearing noise anymore. Now, if you heard an intermittent scrape, it was that was the brake pad on the disc, but there's no bearing noise, because if it was a bearing noise, it would be continuous. It wouldn't start, it wouldn't be periodic. Alright, so that's how you change the wheel bearing on the E65 750 BMW. Now you just need to do the other side. Thanks for watching, and cheers.